Welcome back to our Wretched, with our apologies in advance for this.
Good morning, church. Let me hear you this morning. Oh, come on. God can't even hear you. Let me hear you.
The happy, clappy preacher, which is one of the reasons why I wrote a new book called Judge Not. It just so happens that this apparently on part-time youth pastor on the side, you saw that clip of yourself being obnoxious, and you said what about your performance?
I said, oh, that's nothing.
What do you mean that's nothing?
It gets way more amped up.
So you're telling me that you've been to a church where the guy is zanier than your portrayal?
Oh, definitely.
All right, let me apologize in advance for this. All righty then. In impromptu fashion. All right, so Adrian, give us the pastor that you're thinking of who is more obnoxious than you. And don't just don't go over the top, just give it to us.
I don't think I possibly can go over
All right,
the top.
wait, hold on. Okay, give it to me.
Okay, imagine what you just saw, okay? God can't even hear you, come on! Let me hear some noise in this place! Come on, I can't hear you! Okay, this side, let me hear you!
Oh, no.
Oh, that was weak, come on, this side! Yeah, okay, all right! So,
Okay, you're gonna have to stop now.
My head is gonna explode.
Okay, that is why we focused on pastors who seem to think that they need to get people excited about everything but Jesus Christ. One of the chapters, even my head hurt, I was starting to have veins pop from that. One of the chapters in Judge Not addresses churches that have non-Christian preaching. They talk about a lot of stuff, life lessons, tips, how-to presentations, a lot of pontificating about for whom you should be voting, etc. But frequently they fail to talk about Jesus Christ. Do you possibly attend a church like that? Now, maybe not as obnoxious as what we just saw, but maybe a church that is not really getting to the bullseye of the Bible. For your consideration, we've prepared a little quiz, how you might know that you're attending a church that isn't really preaching a Christian sermon. Here is question number 1. You've heard the sermon, How to Be a Nehemiah Leader. Yeah, what's the problem with that presentation with a lot of pastors have presented? With alliteration? Well, the book of Nehemiah was not written to be a manual how to be a better boss or manager or motivator. Now, maybe Nehemiah did some things that appear to have made him a good leader, but that isn't the point of the book. The point of the book is to show God's faithfulness to his covenantal people. If you recall, the Abrahamic covenant promised that there's always going to be a land, Israel. There will always be some people, the Jews, so that there can be a Messiah that comes from this holy, set-apart people, and that is, of course, Jesus Christ. There was another covenant, though, that was involved in the Old Testament, the Mosaic covenant, which said, this is how I want you to be different. I want you to obey these laws. I'll bless you like a nobody's business, and if you don't, it's going to be very, very hard for you. It's a quid pro quo covenant called the Mosaic covenant. And when the Jews failed to obey it, God was true to his word, and he whacked them, and he scattered them, and he sent them off to foreign nations. But he was also faithful to his Abrahamic covenant and the promise that he gave to Abraham for a land, a nation, and a seed. And so what did he do? He raised up a Nehemiah leader to lead them back and to build up a wall so that temple worship could happen again, because God was determined to make sure that there was going to be a land, a nation, and a seed. And that's what we see in the story of Nehemiah, God's faithfulness to his people to have a land and that they would be a set-apart people so that we could have Jesus. That's what Nehemiah is about. Another sign you're hearing non-Christian preaching, you have invited an unbeliever to church, and your guest was not convicted or at least annoyed. If somebody attends church and they're not a Christian, they shouldn't be going, that was the best speech I've ever heard. Instead, they should go, whoa, that's like contrary to my worldview. That is just not the way that I think. And he kind of made me feel bad about my sins. That is a Christian sermon. And if you invite a guest who's not a believer and they think, you know what, I could do this again because I think I could benefit from these presentations. Apparently you only invite Italians to your church. Then it's not really a Christian sermon. Sign number 3, you're not hearing Christian preaching. You are not growing in holiness. Granted, there could be other reasons why this is not happening, but perhaps one of the biggies is you are not hearing any preaching that is Christ-centered, that motivates, encourages, and even rebukes you to be more holy. Number 4, your fruit of the Spirit tree still produces mostly wormy fruit. There is a difference between didactic, teaching, and preaching, and the difference might be why this is happening. Let's just say a pastor delivers great information, teaches good theology. That would be called teaching, but that's not the same as preaching. Sunday morning, there is teaching combined with an element of exhortation, which elevates teaching, which is good and important, and it has its place, and there are people with the gift of teaching, but with exhortation, it makes it preaching. Have you been obeying this commandment? Have you been denying yourself? Have you been picking up your cross? That is preaching. And maybe if you've only been hearing teaching, even if it's sound without any sort of exhortation, which by the way just doesn't have to come from an elevated voice, but something that exhorts, that points a finger at you and convicts you, if you're not hearing any preaching like that, then you're merely hearing teaching, and that might be why you're not growing as quickly as you should. Are you hearing Christian sermons? Number 5, you're not growing in your love and gratitude for God. Another sign that you're hearing something, but it's not a sermon. When a sermon is done, now, not every single sermon has to end with everybody on their feet going, we love God more, but ultimately it should lead us to that. Why do I say not every sermon? Well, there can be some reasons why the pastor needs to deliver a specific exhortation, the life of the church, etc. But overall, a sermon should cause us to think more highly of God than when we first entered into the church. And if that isn't happening, then maybe you're not hearing sermons, you're just hearing speeches. And finally, another sign. Number 6, you have little or no desire to evangelize. When you see the cross, how can you help but speak about that which you have seen and heard? Oh, maybe because you're never seeing it or hearing it because you're not hearing sermons, you're hearing a speech, or you're hearing this guy.
Oh, you people, and you're whining. You look like an infant. I want more Bible studies. I want to go deeper. I'm sure that there's a church out there where they think it's just for believers, where they preach the doctrines of grace. But if you want to stay in my church, you need to put a plug in it.
You say, that's it, you people have gone too far. Adrian, from whence did you get your inspiration?
The internet, famous pastor.
Actually, a guy who
Yes.
did that very thing, sitting in a high chair, slamming it, saying, you people are a bunch of babies. You can't write that stuff. And apparently he can't write a sermon. And instead he gave a scorching speech to criticize people who actually wanted more theology so that they could grow in holiness and glorify God more. Amazing.